Very good morning. We're glad you're still with us here on Morning at NTV. The hashtag on Twitter is Morning at NTV. We are also big on Facebook. We are streaming live as well on YouTube from those that are watching in the diaspora. We're glad you're part of this conversation. Now, we come on air at this particular segment on the backdrop of news of the death of General Elly Tumwine, the immediate former Minister for Security. He's also a former Member of Parliament representing the Uganda People's Defence Forces. He's also was a historical and one of the gentlemen that made that first attack that, of course, started the guerrilla war of the National Resistance Movement in 1981. History has it that he fired the first bullet, of course, that started that attack on Kabamba. We shall be looking at the life or times of General Elly Tumwine up until his death yesterday at the Aga Khan Hospital in Nairobi, where he was airlifted 2 weeks ago after he was admitted at Nakasero. President Yoweri Museveni, in a message that was posted on his Twitter page, said the general had died of lung cancer and that he was one of the top men who ensured that the National Resistance Movement made its way from the Luero Triangle in the guerrilla war to be able to come and govern for the last 40 years. All that, we shall look at that perspective. We shall be joined very shortly by Honorable Emmanuel Dombo, the Director of Communication at the National Resistance Movement Secretariat. But before we do, let me just take you through some of the stories that are covered in the papers today. The Daily Monitor has General Tumwine emblazoned on the first page as the headline, General Elly Tumwine. April 1954 to August 2022, a general bows out. The Liberation War fighter, who was a man of many talents, rolled into one, succumbed to lung cancer at the Aga Khan Hospital in Nairobi, Kenya yesterday. The life and times of the four-star general is, of course, something you can look forward to in the Daily Monitor if you buy the paper. Museveni leads the country in mourning. MPs Kazo pay tribute to one of their own and pictorial of the man in many hats. There is a quote that has been chosen by the Daily Monitor. I can assure you this is a great day of saying my institution is giving me a send-off, official, open, public, for everyone to know that we have run our race. We have completed our course and we are ready to go. Even if I die now, what has God not done to me? What more can God do to prove me that he loves me a lot? That's a quote, General Elly Tumwine in April. It goes to speak that some gentlemen and ladies, as we go about our business, perhaps understand that, well, we are mortal. Let me just take a look at some of the other stories. Of course, most of what is dominating the Daily Monitor is the pictorial of General Tumwine showing his times. He was a man of many hats. Here we can see handing over a painting to the Kabaka of Buganda in 2014. There are also pictures dating as far back as 2000 and, of course, 1996 at the inauguration of President Yoweri Museveni after that first election. There is also a two-page feature that, of course, has everything that you need to know about the man and, of course, many of the quotes as compiled by the Daily Monitor there. And you will also understand what causes lung cancer. But in other news, just briefly before we go into our interview, government appoints team to audit Uganda Airlines. The team will look into the human resource irregularities at the national carrier. That is on page 9. You can, of course, understand what the Minister for Works and Transport, General Katumba Wamala, had to say about the latest saga at the national carrier. We shall leave it at that for now and, of course, head into our Kickstarter discussion where we are talking about the life and times of General Elly Tumwine, who died yesterday at 5:46 a.m. at the Aga Khan Hospital in Nairobi. The spokesperson of the Ministry of Defence and Veteran Affairs, Brigadier Felix Kulaije, will of course be sharing information a little bit later on the detail of the funeral arrangements and exactly how the state burial shall be conducted. We shall be, of course, looking forward to that and giving it to you as and when that information comes through. For now, though, allow me to welcome Honorable Emmanuel Dombo, the Communications Director at the National Resistance Movement. A very warm welcome and good morning.
Thank you very much and good morning, our listeners.
I'd like to ask you first, how did you receive news of the demise of General Elly Tumwine?
It was very saddening because we had expected, when we read in the media, that when he was airlifted to Nairobi, basically to search for better treatment and and more professional people in that field, that perhaps he will have his life, because he was struggling for life. And when one of our colleagues, Honorable Seninde, went on behalf of the Secretariat and team to visit him in hospital, he told us that he was on life support. And at that time, we knew anything was possible. And when we heard the news being broken on the media houses, it was very sad and painful. But he had fought a fight. And in one of his clips, if you looked in one of recent ceremonies, he talked about so many things, but also talked about if God took him now.
That's right.
And he said he has made his contribution, he has left a trail, he has made his legacy, and as if he was forecasting what was likely to happen, or perhaps because he may have known what his condition was at that time.
That's right.
Nobody knows. But at times, that's how life is. Okay. It's very painful, very sad. And I wish to condole with members of the immediate family, the people of Uganda, and all people of goodwill, that after all, this is what the Bible says, that everybody born of woman lives for a very short time, disappears like a shadow, and has demonstrated that we're all human. And after all, that's the destination that we're all going to take as a people. So our condolences to the family, and we shall wait for the government program and the preparations for the final send-off, so that we can give him the dignified send-off that he deserves, given his contribution to the country of Uganda and to the body politic and the rebuilding of the army that we are proud of as a nation.
Okay, very interesting there. On your reading of history and how General Elly Tumwine emerges as a military leader, right from the guerrilla war from 1981 to 1985, thereabout, what do you make of him? Could you take us through the things that defined for you the kind of leader that he was, or person? Not, of course, the military aspect could be something you never really got to know much, but of course you observed from a vantage point that is authoritative enough. What do you make of the man himself?
I had the privilege to serve with the Honorable Tumwine in the Parliament of Uganda for 20 years.
Okay.
And whenever there was an opportunity to relate closely, I would ask many questions, because I really wanted to find out what motivated these young people at their age, joining the military, to go and abandon the professions they were in, to go in the bush where there was no salary being paid, and they chose to take all this long time. One of the things that I recently, as about a year ago, when we were in Chankwanzi with him and we related, during the political trainings in Chankwanzi, he did inform me that most of their time in the bush, they were in classes than fighting. Initially, when we
hear the story,
absolutely, when you hear of people being in the bush, you literally think that most of the time people are fighting and looking for the enemy and shooting one another. He said no. They actually stayed more in the class when they were in the bush than they did actually in the real fighting.
Okay.
There were times when they chose that they would go and fight, they define where the enemy is and what they would be doing. But most of the time, they were doing political education. And that's how they developed the 10-point program. That's how they developed the training syllabus which they used. That's how they built the nexus within the military in order to define what type of revolutionary army did they want. And I think that's how they got the resilience to show that actually people can be bare-handed. They join a bush and begin a struggle to overthrow an existing government. That's not something that the faint-hearted would want to take.
That's right.
So as young people, they gave in their lives. Others remained in the bush. They didn't come out. But in order to create the apparent stability that we have now, on which other people now have the freedom and the ability to make their additions given on the situations as they be. In Parliament, one of the things that I had an interaction with when we were at Parliament, he told me how he was shot in the eye and he was brought out of the bush in one of the facilities in Kampala here.
In fact, it was Mulago Hospital first, and then Zambia.
And he was brought in the hospital for treatment. He told me that because they had to risk their lives, and they knew at any time they may be, somebody may easily leak the information and he could be hunted and gotten. So he told me that when he was admitted in hospital, he had a kettle, a kettle that could reflect, which he put opposite the door where he had been admitted. And he had to keep monitoring whoever was coming to enter the hospital without person having a proper look at the face of the person who was admitted.
You already affected your eyesight, but somehow you're struggling.
You are struggling to watch through the reflection of the kettle.
Who is coming in.
Who is coming in. And he said he repeatedly had to put that kettle in that specific place. He didn't want to say why he was putting it there.
That's right.
And the nurses kept shifting the kettle, but he kept pushing it back where the kettle was. So that whoever comes in,
he has an opportunity
to know him before that person knows who the patient was there. These are the type of risks that existed then. And when people now enjoy their apparent calm and at times make the comments about the statements that he made as he was going, others may not wish to remember that it was a very hectic struggle at that time. The other thing which many people did not have an opportunity to interact with Tumwine about is basically about his Christian life. Behind his military hardware and appearance was a very soft person inside who really loved God, and when he talks about it, you'd see this demonstrated in the various prayer breakfasts and the prayer session meetings that he had with members of Parliament and at times with their families. And even when he was talking, he would talk about the military. He was very proud person about the military uniform, and it's a cloth that he almost never wanted to put off whenever he remembered where they came from. But at least behind it was a very soft person who really revered God, loved God, and loved his country.
Okay, you say you spent 20 years in Parliament, of course, deliberating on national issues, and you often had him and interacted with him, especially on matters of national discourse. Could you take us through his deliberations on the floor, especially on aspects including the role of the military in governance and the fact that the UPDF is embedded in Parliament, something that is very controversial but still remains debatable?
General Elly Tumwine strongly believed that NRM was an offspring of the National Resistance Army fight struggle. And he strongly believes that even the very strong nations like the Americas, like the US and other strong nations, that behind the strength and the soft demeanor, there is a very strong military that guarantees state sovereignty.
That's right.
And even here, he did not hide it. He really told you that he believes that the state cannot stand unless you have a very strong military. A military that guarantees peace, but also that is deterrent, which will be respected by those who may want to confront or destabilize the status quo. He always believed in the military, where people will think twice before they attempt to destabilize what would be the ordinary peace where everybody would love to participate. Him as a military officer, he was very political, by the way. Even when the UPDF by law is not supposed to engage in the political activities, for him, he strongly believes that his genesis, his desire to join the army, was not necessarily to become an army man and serve a professional army, but was forced by circumstances which was able to establish a necessary political atmosphere where people should participate. So even when he was a UPDF officer, he really enjoyed participating in the NRM activities. That's why even when members of parliament went to Chankwanzi, he would come in and give his lectures. He would reminisce on the songs that they used to sing in the bush, and he enjoyed telling the stories, how the battles were fought. So he believed the military has a very strong role to guarantee sovereignty of the state, to create stability internal, but also to be respected among equals, that the military had to be very strong in order for a country to be respected among the equals.
Okay, now General Elly Tumwine was often comfortable speaking on controversial issues. He is one man who would reiterate what he said in case there was somebody who perhaps could have taken his statements out of context or even misquoted him, like some politicians would say. I'd just love to read some of the quotes here that were very controversial. General Tumwine wrote a long article in newspapers one time where he described Pius Bigirimana as a man who had fallen from the high table to a stool from OPM to the Gender Ministry. And Mr. Bigirimana, of course, later responded to the piece saying the general had fallen from the high table to the floor. Do you think the general being taken away, or rather being not sacked, but of course dismissed as Minister for Security, and then going on what others love to say as Katebe, prompting him to say this statement, and I will again quote, "I think he, in reference to President Yoweri Museveni, knows that I am not after these positions that people clamor for, and perhaps that is why he would rather take care of his political interests of balancing here and there, and I remain a freedom fighter, and I admire him and thank him because he's my teacher, he's also my mentor. You know, it should be our duty to save him from being Ngamba Nyeka." The Banyankore have the proverb, Ngamba Nyeka, a newcomer mabi, that the one who does not take advice brews some real bad beer. Do you think right now the country has lost one of the gentlemen who says it as it is?
General Elly Tumwine had the privilege of advantage of what many Ugandans don't have. Right now, when you look at President Museveni, many of the senior colleagues with whom he came from the bush, others have retired, others have since died. And for us, when we were young in Parliament, and what gave us courage to speak, for instance, when we were in the movement caucus or in Parliament, or even to develop the stature that we did as young people, you'd look at a gentleman like Honorable Kategaya. When he stands up and makes a submission, then you young people would pick the courage to come up and say something in addition or supplementary. When you look at a person as like Honorable Kaijuka, Honorable Mshega, Honorable Butime, and such senior colleagues with whom he had come. And apart from Elly Tumwine, Tom Butime, many of them have since retired and others have died. But Honorable Tumwine was a straight talker. And at times he even bothered to those who were very close with him. He would at times sound very vulgar. He used quoting the Kinyankole proverbs. I don't want to repeat some of them here, but some of those proverbs can be as very vulgar, because one of there is a time we are having a discussion with him and about the marriage bills and whether there can be rape in marriage. And when he brought the Kinyankole context and how the people in the village viewed it, it was as vulgar as that, because he said for them in Ankole, they believed that whoever consents at the time when you get into marriage, you consent to everything that is done in marriage at the time you accept to enter into marriage. And he quoted the proverb in Kinyankole which said that no genda kushwera no vyama magarama. He was saying that a person who goes to get married, he sleeps with he sleeps facing up. That really to demonstrate that
you're ready for everything.
Outright consent, right from the beginning to the end. But that was the other side of him. He could even say harder things, which I don't want to repeat here, of course, on TV and for the media, for our listeners. But that was the honorable that we had in Parliament. When we One time when when members of parliament and other leaders were invited to go for prayer breakfast when we were in parliament, Honorable Tumwine came back with his colleagues, Honorable Timuranga, I think the First Lady then, and other people. And they were very key at that time, I think 1997-98, in beginning what we now have as a ritual in Parliament, the parliamentary prayer breakfast. That usually happens around the Independence, the Independence Day.
Yeah, in the run-up to Independence.
Run-up to the Independence. It is something that was started by them. But you'd really wonder, this rabid general who gave in his life to go and fight, but behind it you know that he also loved and respected God, and he knew that above all, God is supreme.
That's right.
This is something that was not very common. But going back to the statements that he said, you also know that right now the most quoted statement about Elly is the advice he gave to the young people, which during I think it was during the presidential elections and the riots that were taking place.
After the 52 people
were killed, and he said that don't joke with police. He was capable of doing A, B, C, D. Yes. Many people.
What do you think that was a little bit on the high end of entitlement for a government official to tell citizenry that are already grappling with the need for security from the government that if you do anything that does not augur well within the policeman's eyes, he can act the way he wants?
You know, the expectations and the requirements of a minister of state in order to create stability for everybody, you see, he has a dual responsibility. He must protect the rights, but also he must ensure there is stability in the state.
That's right.
For people to enjoy their individual rights. Whereas General Tumwine said that, I don't think anybody can point at any person to say that General Tumwine was responsible for shooting so and so, for shooting the other. This was a deterrent message and a warning, which was very clear because, you know, during riotous situations, many times the rules of engagement change. Not only here in Uganda, but even in many sophisticated and modern societies. Here, he was only frank coming up to tell the people that the circumstances as they are. Because human beings, if you looked at films of men in uniform, they also have a life to protect.
That's right.
And they love themselves. And in self-defense, you don't know to what extent somebody would use his judgment in order. So instead of doing the risk and getting fatally injured or died, General Tumwine came out to warn people that don't risk because you don't know the state of mind of the policeman who is armed in an attempt to protect himself but also protect the state and create stability. You may not know how he's going to react. And in most cases, some of the people who died may not necessarily have been as bad, but because some of them could have been misled. It is a statement that you needed to be in his shoes to begin evaluating that under the circumstances, what would have somebody said in order to create the stability that many people enjoy. Unfortunately, that's one of the reasons that the reasons that he will be remembered about. But beyond that, there are many good sides of Elly Tumwine that people know about. One of them is that when you look at his wear, he
was a fashionista, so to speak. Somebody who actually designed his own military uniform, and it was one of the things that defined the man. The ability to be able to design your own military uniform in a setting that has rules that you're supposed to get a uniform that is designed for just about every officer. That alone spoke about the fact that he was an equal among equals.
You know, if you looked at the UPDF Act, there are members of the Historical High Command who are not very many, who have permanent presence and are mentioned by name within the law as members of the Historical High Command. He's privileged to have been one of these. And because of the historical nature and contribution of what they have done, really, you can give them a benefit of doubt and say, over time, they will phase out, but during their time, they
allow them do certain things.
They sacrifice their life in order to create the status quo. But progressively, as we professionalize, some of those things will cease to be, and the UPDF will be run.
That one brings to the fore an aspect that perhaps should be brought forth for debate. The fact that there's a generation of soldiers who are perhaps very entitled, and that the country should be able to look into that particular aspect so that we can know how do we deal with this transition.
Already the transition was on, because many of them have since passed on. They are not as many. If you looked at that number within the UPDF Act, it might be about 6 or 7 remaining, and a number of them are in their evening years. And I don't think anybody would want to complain. But even when he did those things, General Tumwine was not swaggeresque. He was not, he would not go on wanting to show pomp, because he's a general and he's the sense of entitlement, right of way, and when he's in parliament, he would bulldoze the others. No, he did not have that demeanor as a person, even when he has a historical contribution for which he was proud to talk about, especially if you try to despise him as a person, despise what he is as an individual.
He often came off as very defensive if you questioned how he has done his things or even what he has said. But of course, here in the Daily Monitor, one of the features that have been written today in memory of the General is his influence on the design of Uganda's money, the 50-shilling note. If I can read here, between 2009 and 2010, he participated in the designing of the new 50,000 currency note, which won the International Banknote Society Award as the most beautiful note for 2010. The design team was paid a staggering 2 billion Uganda shillings for that. The General told the Daily Monitor then that the currency note won an award that it took them a year of research and travel to different parts of the country to come up with a 50,000 shilling currency note design. He was an artist. He was a painter.
Professionally, what General Tumwine was before he even went to the military is that at the time when he went to the university, he chose to do fine art.
Yes,
a profession that he was still proud about, even when he was in the military. He talks about so many things that he designed. He influenced members of parliament to amend the rules of procedure to adopt traditional wear as part of the acceptable wear within the Parliament of Uganda. This is not something that did exist many years ago, but he came and said, why should we only showcase the foreign philosophy of jackets, ties, when we have very nice counter suits that could be used, and they are very smart. We have many African wear, and many times he came to Parliament in his traditionally, locally designed outfits, and nobody would rule him out of order, and they came to be accepted. And many members of Parliament now feel free to use them just because of his wisdom and desire to portray what is African.
Okay, of course there is a lot, it is written here. He was a man of many hats, including a singer, and of course he does inspire a lot when it comes to many who want to aspire to be singers, no doubt. But going forward, the demise of a man of his stature right now should offer the country and the political leaders a moment of reflection. What are the things that you think Uganda, the people who hold power or are in positions of power, must and have to reflect on?
There are so many things. One of them, frankly speaking, is we have had many very important persons die in Uganda and going to die abroad. Recently, we have the Right Honorable Speaker. Just the other day, they returned the Honorable Jessica Erio from the US.
From the United States,
Even when we know that medical referrals is a professional process which is done to seek either higher talent, higher technology,
better
or better science and technology. must begin exploring the possibility to ask the harder questions. To what extent are we going to do this? Because
for how long shall we
keep doing this? When are we going to look at the possibilities of other people from other neighboring countries
coming to Uganda,
referring their people for medication in Uganda? Can't we transform and build the Ugandan delivery of health services to such proficiency that our people mainly can be treated and die here, or other people from the neighboring states can be referred here? This is something we must begin conversations about. Government has attempted to create opportunities to build professional hospitals that can help, but this is something that must be expedited and deliberately invested in, either at private level, because Aga Khan, the hospital where he was taken, is a private hospital, and private businessmen is an area which can be explored for them to create an opportunity out of it. That's one. Secondly, there is a generation which is phasing out, and especially people who are in the bush. One of the things before, when I had an opportunity to discuss with Honorable John Akena, I did ask him whether President Milton Obote did author any books about the history of Uganda. Quite often we read about things as people think about him. But did he write so that people can see what was going on in his mind at the time he made decisions that he did? I want to call on the people, especially those who are in the bush, those who have made contributions, even those who have had a role to play like us, to document some things that people will look at and know what influenced their decisions that they took at the time they did it. This is something that we must show that death is real, generals are passing. President Museveni has done so well because he has written a lot. Whatever paper he does now, he writes and prints it and publishes it for posterity, or for people to know why did he do the decisions, or why did he make the decisions that he did under the circumstances. These are some of the things that we should keep reflecting on.
All right, that discussion about the life and times of the late General Elly Tumwine cannot be exhausted in a single sitting like this.
Absolutely,
one. Of course, as the country continues to mourn the demise of one of the top leaders in the country, especially within the military, we do hope and condole with the family, the loved ones, and of course the friends that are right now grappling with the grief of his passing. For those that are on social media and all the other communication platforms, we urge you to desist from making statements that you wouldn't want to be made to you in case you were in that particular position of mourning a loved one, or even if people are, of course, grieving your own passing. Let's be human. And of course, many thanks to Honorable Emmanuel Dombo, the Director of Communications at the National Resistance Movement Secretariat, for the perspective and of course his insights into the life of the man. That will do it for the Kickstarter discussion, but stay with us. Morning at NTV continues. That's the hashtag on Twitter. We're glad you're part of the conversation.